I still remember the letter, the yellow envelope that changed everything. It arrived on a Monday morning, slipped halfway under my door like it had been too shy to fully enter my life. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, elegant, but trembling. My name, Evelyn Grace Harrow, was written as though the writer had whispered it aloud while writing, almost lovingly. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my hands trembling slightly, the way they often do now that I've crossed 70. I hadn't expected any mail that day. I hadn't expected anything, really. My days had settled into quiet routines, tea at dawn, knitting by the window, and feeding the sparrows that nested near the fence of my small rented apartment. But that letter, it breathed change. Inside was a formal document and a short handwritten note. The document, stamped by a law firm I'd never heard of, stated that I had inherited a house from a stranger named Clara Beaumont. The name meant nothing to me. The lawyer's tone was concise and cold. As the sole inheritor listed in the last will and testament of the late Miss Clara Beaumont, you are requested to appear at the Redding and Beaumont Law Office this Thursday at 10 a.m. I blinked at the words for several minutes. Surely it was a mistake. I'd never known anyone named Clara Beaumont. I'd never even been close to anyone outside my small circle of neighbors, and my late husband's family, most of whom had long stopped calling after his funeral 15 years ago. And yet my name was there, clear as the morning light. That night I couldn't sleep. The air in my apartment felt heavier, like the walls were listening. I kept thinking about that name, Clara. Something about it stirred an echo, faint but persistent. I tried to dismiss it, but when I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamt of an old melody, a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood, a woman's voice, soft and distant, singing, "Hush now, little dove." When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears I couldn't explain. Thursday came quickly. I dressed carefully, choosing my late husband's favorite gray shawl, though I didn't know why. Maybe it gave me courage. The law office was old, tall glass windows, dusted brass handles, and the faint smell of paper and ink. Inside, the air buzzed with silence. The lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Redding, barely looked at me as he handed over the keys, a silver set tied with a pale blue ribbon, and an address, 17 Wisteria Lane. He said, "Miss Beaumont was quite insistent that you receive the property immediately. She left no relatives, no debts, and her wish was that the house be yours without question." Without question. That phrase struck me. "Did she say why she left it to me?" I asked. Mr. Redding looked up briefly, his eyes flicking toward me, then down again to his papers. "Only that you would understand in time." I felt the floor shift beneath me. Understand what? The drive to Wisteria Lane took an hour. I didn't remember the area. It was somewhere on the outskirts of the city, a sleepy old neighborhood wrapped in ivy and memory. The closer I got, the more something strange tugged at me. The streets were unfamiliar, yet my heart beat with the odd rhythm of recognition, like the air itself carried whispers of things long buried. When I finally found number 17, my breath caught. It was a 2-story wooden house, weathered but dignified, sitting behind a white picket fence. Wild wisteria climbed the porch railings, spilling purple flowers over the steps. The windows were clouded, the curtains drawn. It looked like the kind of house you'd see in a dream, a place that existed between yesterday and tomorrow. I stood at the gate for a long time, clutching the keys, trembling. I didn't know why, but my chest ached with a deep, nostalgic sorrow. Inside, the air was stale but strangely comforting, like stepping into a preserved memory. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, cutting through the cracks of the curtains. A clock ticked faintly somewhere, though the air felt frozen in time. Every piece of furniture seemed placed with care, an old rocking chair by the window, lace doilies on the tables, porcelain cups neatly stacked on a shelf. And then, on the mantel above the fireplace, I saw it. A framed photograph of a woman holding a baby. The woman's face made my knees weaken. She had my eyes. I stepped closer, my hands shaking so violently the frame rattled when I touched it. She looked about 30, her dark hair pulled back loosely, her smile soft and wistful. The baby in her arms was me. I didn't need proof. I felt it deep in my bones. But that couldn't be. My mother, my adoptive mother, had told me my birth mother died when I was 2. I had never seen a photograph of her. She'd said there were none left, that the past should stay buried. But here she was, alive at least long enough to build this house, live in it, and leave it to me under another name, Clara Beaumont. My birth mother's name had been Clara, but her surname, that was supposed to be Harrow. The walls seemed to close in on me. The air grew heavy, almost mournful. I turned the photograph over. Written in the same elegant, trembling handwriting as the letter were the words, "For my Evelyn, my dove, forgive me when you find this. You were never meant to be lost." My knees gave out. I sank onto the floor, the photo clutched to my chest, the dust rising around me like ghosts. For over 70 years, I'd believed I was abandoned, that my birth mother had died. But she'd lived, and she'd left me this house, the house I was meant to inherit all along. And as I looked around at the furniture, the smell, the faint scent of lavender and old wood, I felt something else, something chillingly familiar. I'd been here before. The smell of lavender lingered in the air, soft but haunting, like the ghost of a memory brushing past my cheek. I sat there on the old wooden floor, the photograph still trembling in my hands, my heart thudding so loudly it drowned out the faint ticking of that hidden clock. I couldn't stop staring at her face, my mother's face. Clara. Or was she still Mrs. Harrow then? My mind couldn't keep up with the flood of questions that washed over me. I had been told she was gone before I could remember her, that she died in an accident, a fire, something vague my adoptive mother, Agnes, never explained. But the scent in this house, the wallpaper, the faint hum of the clock, it all clawed at something deep inside me. I knew this place, not from photos, from touch, from sound. My body remembered what my mind could not. I rose slowly, clutching the photo like a lifeline, and walked through the house. Every room felt like an echo. The parlor had a piano, slightly out of tune, its lid closed but a single yellowing sheet of music resting atop it. Hush, now, little dove. The same lullaby I had dreamed of the night before. My breath caught, I pressed one key, and the note wavered softly through the still air. That was when I felt it a cold draught. It came from the hallway, near the staircase. The air seemed to shift, heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. I followed it, my feet creaking against the floorboards, until I reached a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. It was narrow, half hidden behind an old coat rack. When I pulled it open, a rush of cold air greeted me, a staircase leading downward. The basement. I hesitated. My heart said, "Don't go," but something stronger pulled me in a need that felt older than reason. Each step groaned under my weight, the air growing thicker, colder. When I reached the bottom, I saw boxes stacked against the walls, old trunks covered in cobwebs. There was a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling, its glow weak, but enough to reveal what looked like decades of secrets sealed away. I opened the first box, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to one name, Evelyn. My name. I reached for the top one, its envelope brittle with age. Inside was a folded letter written in that same elegant, trembling handwriting. "My darling Evelyn, if you are reading this, then fate has been kinder than I ever deserved. I tried to find you. I tried to bring you home. But I was told you were gone. They said you died before your 2nd birthday. They lied. Someone took you from me, and I never stopped searching. If you've found this house, you've found me too. You were never unwanted. You were stolen." The paper nearly slipped from my hand. My body went numb. Stolen? I reread it over and over, my eyes blurring with tears. My adoptive mother, Agnes, had said she found me at an orphanage after a tragedy after my mother died. But now, this letter told a different story. My entire life, every comforting bedtime story, every "You're safe now," she whispered, it all twisted inside me into something dark. I staggered back and leaned against the cold wall. The light flickered. The sound of footsteps creaked above me. I froze. For a long moment the air went utterly silent. Then creak. Another step. Slow, measured. I looked up the staircase, my pulse hammering. "Hello?" My voice cracked. No answer. I waited, every muscle tense, but the sound faded as quickly as it came. When I finally forced myself to climb back up, the main hallway was empty. The air felt colder than before, and the scent of lavender was stronger, almost choking. I closed the basement door and leaned against it, my mind spinning. I was 74 years old, and my entire identity was unraveling. That night, I couldn't leave. I should have gone home, but something anchored me to that house, as if Clara herself wouldn't let me go until I knew the truth. So I stayed. I made a fire in the living room fireplace, wrapped myself in a blanket from the couch, and stared at the shadows flickering on the walls. My thoughts tangled with memories of being small, of soft humming, of a silver hairpin with a dove carved into it. I could see flashes now, clearer than dreams. A woman with dark hair, gentle hands, and the smell of lavender soap. My mother. It wasn't just imagination. It was memory returning after a lifetime of silence. At some point near midnight, I must have drifted off. I woke hours later to the faint sound of music, the piano in the parlor. A single note, then another, slow, deliberate, like someone testing the keys. I sat upright, heart racing. The fire had gone out, but the room was faintly lit by moonlight. I waited, breath shallow, another key pressed, then silence. I told myself it was the wind, the house settling, my mind fraying under the weight of old ghosts. But when I stepped into the parlor, the air was thick with that familiar scent again, lavender, and the sheet of music that had rested atop the piano was now on the floor. Someone, or something, had touched it. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere until I found out who Clara really was, what had happened to her, and who had taken me from her. I didn't care how painful the truth might be. The next morning, sunlight cut through the dust, casting the house in a gentler glow. I explored room after room. Each one told a fragment of her story, a hairbrush still holding a few strands of dark hair, an old locket on the dresser with the initials C.B., a child's blanket folded neatly in a trunk upstairs, embroidered with the name Evie. Evie, my nickname? Before I could even speak it myself. In the attic, I found a small wooden box. Inside was a birth certificate, my birth certificate. The name written was Evelyn Beaumont. My breath caught. I wasn't adopted. I was renamed. I sank onto the dusty floor, the paper shaking in my trembling hands. My whole life, my name, my story, my family had been rewritten by someone else. And beneath the certificate, tucked into the corner of the box, was another folded piece of paper, an old photograph, torn and faded, showing two women. One was Clara, the other was Agnes, my adoptive mother. Standing beside her, smiling, the blood drained from my face. She knew her, she knew my mother, and she lied to me for 70 years. The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the floor like a dying leaf. My knees buckled, and I sank beside it, staring until the edges blurred through my tears. There was no mistaking her, Agnes, my adoptive mother, smiling as though she and Clara were dear friends. The two women stood side by side in front of this very house, sunlight dancing over their faces. Agnes looked younger, her expression serene. But Clara's smile was different, strained, almost fearful, like someone smiling because a camera demands it, not the heart. For 70 years, Agnes had woven a story of tragedy, how she had found me after a terrible accident, how no one else wanted me, how she had saved me from a lonely fate. I had believed every word, clinging to her love like a lifeline through my lonely adulthood. Now, all I could see was betrayal, a slow, careful betrayal that had shaped my entire existence. My hands shook as I picked up the photo again. On the back, in the same elegant handwriting as the letters below, were the words, "Our last summer." Before everything changed, my vision blurred. I needed answers. I needed to know who Agnes really was, what she had done, and what had become of Clara. The house creaked as I moved from room to room, opening every drawer, every box, desperate for something, anything that could explain the connection. In the study, behind a shelf of yellowed books, I found a tin box sealed with an old ribbon. Inside were folded newspaper clippings. The first headline I saw sent chills down my spine. Local woman missing after mysterious fire child presumed dead. The date was August 7th, 1951, my birth year. The article described a house fire on the outskirts of the city. The woman's name Clara Beaumont. Her child, Evelyn, was reported missing and later presumed dead after no trace was found. The fire had been deemed accidental, but I was alive. I was alive, and Agnes had raised me under her roof, changing my name, my story, my truth. My mind swirled with 1,000 memories that suddenly seemed poisoned, the way Agnes had flinched whenever I asked about my birth mother, the way she'd changed the subject. The one time I'd found her burning old letters in the kitchen, and she'd scolded me for asking questions. I clutched the clipping in my hands until the paper tore. My breath came in shallow gasps. I felt dizzy, as though the air itself carried a secret it didn't want me to hear. Then something caught my eye, a faint mark on the floorboards near the desk, like a small square indentation. I knelt and ran my fingers along the edges. A loose plank. I wedged it open with a letter opener and found a small metal box hidden underneath. Inside was a single item, a silver hairpin in the shape of a dove. My chest constricted. I remembered it. I remembered that hairpin. I had seen it before. As a child, Agnes had worn it once, years ago. When I'd asked where it came from, she had smiled faintly and said, "A friend gave it to me long ago." My stomach turned. That friend had been Clara. The hairpin gleamed faintly in the dim light, almost mocking me. I turned it over in my hand and noticed tiny engravings along the inner curve. C.B. for my dove. It was hers, my mother's, and Agnes had kept it all these years. The room seemed to spin. I pressed the hairpin to my chest and sank into the chair by the window, the sunlight cutting through the dusty glass and painting long streaks of gold across the room. I thought of the nights Agnes had brushed my hair, singing softly, calling me her little dove, how she had said it with such affection, such warmth. But now that same word turned my blood cold. She hadn't chosen it for me. She'd stolen it. The sound of the clock struck sharply through the silence 12 times. Noon. The echoes lingered, heavy and unkind. And then another sound. The front door creaked. I froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I stood, every muscle stiff, the hairpin clutched tight in my palm. The air grew still, the only sound my heartbeat pulsing in my ears. The steps moved closer through the hallway, toward the living room. "Hello?" My voice trembled. No answer. I took one cautious step forward. The light from the window fell across the floor, stretching toward the doorway. And then a shadow moved across it. My throat tightened. Who's there? Silence. Then a faint, rasping breath. Evelyn. The voice was barely audible, but the way it curled around my name, it was familiar. Agnes? I whispered. A figure stepped into the light. Older now, frail, leaning on a cane. Her white hair was neatly pinned, her eyes watery but sharp as ever. It was her. My adoptive mother, my betrayer. "What are you doing here?" I managed, my voice shaking. She looked at me for a long time, her lips trembling. "I knew you'd come here someday. she said softly. "I always knew this house would call you back. My heart pounded. You lied to me. You told me my mother was dead." She lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening around the cane. "I didn't lie," she said quietly. "I just didn't tell you everything." Anger flared in me, raw and sharp. "You stole me, Agnes. You took me from her." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time in my life, she looked old, not in years, but in guilt. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I was supposed to protect you." "Protect me from what?" She looked up, her eyes wet with tears. "From your mother." The words hit like a slap. I stared at her, stunned. "From Clara?" "She was my mother." Agnes shook her head, trembling. "You don't understand. There were things about Clara you don't know. Things she did. Things she was. I didn't steal you, Evelyn. I saved you." Her voice broke on the last word, and for a long, frozen moment, the room was filled only with the sound of the old clock ticking, ticking, ticking like it was keeping time for the dead. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but her words struck a terrible chord inside me, a dark, rising fear that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lying, that maybe my mother hadn't been the woman I remembered at all. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with ghosts. I stared at Agnes, unable to tell if I was looking at the woman who raised me or a stranger who had ruined my life. Her hands trembled as she gripped her cane, her knuckles white and frail. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream until every lie she ever told me shattered around us. But something in her eyes, a sorrow so deep it looked ancient, made me pause. "Saved me?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "You took me from my mother, changed my name, burned every trace of her existence, and you call that saving?" Agnes closed her eyes, tears sliding silently down her wrinkled cheeks. "If you knew what she did, you'd understand," she said softly. "I loved Clara once. We were like sisters. But she changed, Evelyn. After your father left, she became someone I didn't recognize. She was consumed by jealousy, by grief. She thought everyone was trying to take you from her. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. She locked herself in this house with you. When I came to visit, she barely spoke, just watched me with those wild eyes, holding you too tight, whispering things to you that didn't make sense. Her words cut through me like glass. "You're lying," I said, shaking my head. "My mother wasn't like that. I remember her singing gentle, kind—" "Memories fade, child," she interrupted, "especially when they're made of love you wanted to believe in." I couldn't breathe. The floor beneath me felt unsteady. I looked around the room, the fading wallpaper, the piano, the faint scent of lavender still clinging to the curtains. None of it fit the image she was painting. But her voice, her trembling, broken voice, made it hard to dismiss her completely. "What happened the night of the fire?" I asked finally. Agnes stared at the floor. "She called me," she said quietly, "late at night. Said she couldn't do it anymore. I drove here. When I came inside, the house was dark. She was sitting right there." Agnes pointed to the corner near the fireplace, rocking you in her arms, humming that lullaby. She looked gone, empty. She said she'd rather see you both dead than let anyone take you from her. I flinched as if struck. No, I whispered. Yes, Agnes said, her voice trembling. I begged her to stop. She didn't listen. She poured kerosene near the kitchen door. The match slipped from her hand before I could stop her. The fire spread so fast I could barely breathe. I grabbed you and ran. By the time I got outside, the whole house was burning. I thought she'd followed me, but she never came out. The words hung heavy between us, unbearable. I stared at the flickering fireplace, the shadows dancing on the walls, imagining flames devouring the same space decades ago. You could have told me, I said through clenched teeth. I couldn't, she whispered. You were so small, so fragile. The authorities thought you died in the fire, too. I told them the truth would destroy you, so I gave you a new name, a new life. I did what I thought was right. I turned away from her, my chest heaving. I wanted to reject her story, to call her a liar. But her shaking hands, her cracked voice, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like guilt carved into her bones for 70 years. And yet, something didn't add up. If Clara had started the fire, why would she build this house again? How could she have left letters and my birth certificate here, decades after the event? Unless... Agnes, I said slowly, my voice trembling. How did she die exactly? Did they find her body? Agnes froze. Her eyes flickered just for a second, but I saw it. That hesitation, that fear. No, she said too quickly. No, they didn't. The fire was too strong. There was nothing left to find. A lie. I felt it in my gut. I stepped closer, my voice low and trembling. You said she died. But the records, the lawyer's letter, it said, the late Clara Beaumont, someone knew she lived long after that fire. She owned this house. She left it to me. How? Agnes's lips parted, but no words came. Her shoulders began to shake. I didn't know she was still alive, she whispered finally. God, forgive me, I didn't know. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. She must have escaped somehow. Maybe she rebuilt it. Maybe she hid here. But why didn't she come for you? Why didn't she tell me? Her voice cracked on the last question, and for the first time, I saw something raw beneath the layers of guilt, fear, genuine, bone-deep fear. Because she knew you wouldn't let her, I said quietly. You took me, Agnes. You built your life on her grief. Maybe she wanted to protect me from you. Agnes lifted her face, eyes wide with horror. No, she said, shaking her head violently. You don't understand. I loved you. I loved her. I never wanted this. Her voice rose, sharp and broken. The air in the room shifted, almost electric. The light outside dimmed as clouds gathered. The house groaned, an old, weary sound that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. And then a sudden crash from upstairs. We both froze. Agnes clutched her chest. What was that? My eyes darted toward the ceiling. Stay here, I said, though my knees trembled. I climbed the staircase, every step groaning under my weight. The air upstairs was colder, the hallway darker. The door to the master bedroom was half open, swaying slightly as if moved by breath. When I stepped inside, I felt it, the unmistakable smell of lavender and smoke. The rocking chair by the window was moving, slowly, rhythmically. No one sat in it. A chill ran down my spine. The curtains fluttered, though the windows were closed. On the vanity lay a single object that hadn't been there before, a locket. Its silver surface glimmered faintly in the half-light. I picked it up. Inside was a tiny photograph of a woman holding a baby. Clara again, me again, and behind the photograph, tucked so tightly it almost tore, was a note. She took you from me once, but I am still here, the house remembers. My pulse pounded in my ears. The air felt alive, whispering. I turned slowly toward the rocking chair, still moving, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I saw her reflection in the window. A woman with dark hair, pale skin, eyes full of sorrow. My mother, and she was watching me. I couldn't breathe. My reflection stood frozen beside hers, my face aged and trembling, hers young and untouched by time, her eyes filled with something between sorrow and accusation. Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone. The window showed only my own pale face, the outline of the rocking chair still swaying behind me. My knees gave out. I clutched the locket to my chest, my heart hammering as the air in the room thickened, pressing against my lungs. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but something held me there, some invisible pull that felt maternal, mournful. The scent of lavender deepened, curling around me like arms that weren't there. "Clara," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Mother, if you can hear me, please tell me what happened." The silence that followed was almost alive. Then, faintly, I heard it, the sound of a woman humming that same lullaby. "Hush now, little dove, hush now, my love." The tune echoed through the room, soft as breath, low as regret. I turned toward the door, trembling. The sound drifted down the hallway, leading me toward the stairs. I followed it, step by slow step, my hand grazing the wall for balance. The tune grew stronger, closer, until it led me back to the parlor. Agnes was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. The moment I entered, she looked up and froze. "Why do you look like that?" she whispered. "What do you mean?" I asked. Her voice quivered. "Your eyes, they look just like hers." She pushed herself up with effort, her cane shaking. "Evelyn, listen to me. Whatever you think you saw, it's not her. It's this house. It's been waiting for you. For years. It's been waiting." "Waiting?" I echoed. "Yes," she said, her tone hollow. "It never stopped calling. That's why I never came back. That's why I left town after the fire. The walls here remember her, her voice, her pain. You were the only thing she truly loved. That love never died, it just changed into something that shouldn't exist." I stared at her, horrified. "You're saying she's haunting this house?" Agnes's lips trembled. "I'm saying she became it." The fire crackled behind us, though I hadn't lit it. I turned toward the sound, my stomach twisting. The flames burned low, but inside them, I could almost make out the shape of a woman's face. Watching, Agnes began to cry quietly. She tried to take me once. After the fire, I'd wake at night hearing her lullaby, smelling the smoke. I'd see her in mirrors, standing behind me. I thought it was guilt. But when I came to this house years later to lay flowers on the land where she'd died, it was new, rebuilt, untouched, and her name was still on the deed. She'd come back, somehow. I felt the room spin. My fingers clutched the locket until the metal dug into my skin. If she came back, I whispered, why didn't she come for me? Agnes looked up, her eyes hollow. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't want to. Or maybe she was waiting for you to come to her on your own. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room. The fire flared high, bright enough to blind me for a moment. When it dimmed, the air was full of whispers, soft, overlapping whispers, words I couldn't understand. Agnes's cane clattered to the floor as she covered her ears. "Stop it!" she shouted. "Stop!" The lights flickered. The portrait above the fireplace fell and shattered. My mother's face, Clara's face, stared up at us from the broken glass, and then, out of the chaos, a single voice rose above the others. Calm, familiar. "You took her from me?" Agnes gasped. "No, no, please." The words came again, louder, the voice dripping with sorrow and fury. "You took my dove." The fire roared. The curtains whipped violently as though caught in an invisible storm. I screamed, reaching for Agnes, but she stumbled back, clutching her chest. "I'm sorry, Clara," she cried. "I loved her too. I only wanted to save her." The house groaned, every beam creaking like it was alive. A crack splintered across the wall. The clock stopped ticking, and then silence. Agnes collapsed onto the rug, her breathing ragged. I dropped beside her, grabbing her trembling hand. "Agnes, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open, wet with tears. Tell her I never meant to hurt her." "Tell who?" I whispered, though I knew the answer. "Your mother," she breathed. "Tell her I forgive her." And with that, her hand went limp in mine. Her head tilted to the side. The room went utterly still. The fire extinguished itself with a soft hiss, smoke curling upward like a sigh. I sat there, frozen, holding the hand of the woman who had raised me, lied to me, and maybe, in her own twisted way, loved me too. I didn't know what to feel. The hate I'd carried for her dissolved into something colder, emptier. The kind of grief that doesn't cry, it just settles deep and stays forever. The house seemed to exhale. The whispers faded. For the first time since I'd arrived, the air felt calm. Then, faintly, the rocking chair upstairs began to move again. I rose, every step heavy, my legs weak. I followed the sound back to the master bedroom. The chair swayed slowly, the window open now, curtains dancing with the night air. On the vanity lay the locket I thought I still held, but my hands were empty. Inside the open locket, the photograph had changed. It no longer showed a woman and a baby. It showed two women, Clara and Agnes, standing together, smiling. Beneath them, faintly etched, were the words, "Our dove will always be safe." I felt tears burn my eyes. My knees gave out again, and I pressed my forehead against the floor, whispering through sobs, "I forgive you, both of you." The room fell utterly quiet. Then, for just a heartbeat, the lavender scent bloomed warm and full. The chair stopped moving, and a faint voice, almost like wind, murmured, "Thank you." The window closed on its own. When I looked up, the house seemed softer, lighter. The walls no longer groaned, the air no longer wept. For the first time, it felt like a home. I stayed there until dawn, sitting by the window as sunlight crept through the curtains. The shadows dissolved, the warmth returning like life itself, and for the first time in 70 years, I felt peace. But as I turned to leave the room, something caught my eye, the faint reflection in the window, my mother's face again, smiling gently. And this time I smiled back. The morning light poured gently through the lace curtains, touching the faded walls with warmth that had been absent for decades. I sat on the old wooden chair by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold, staring out at the quiet garden where wisteria vines swayed in the soft breeze. The house, once heavy with sorrow and secrets, now seemed to breathe differently, peacefully, almost gratefully. Agnes's body had been taken away hours ago. The coroner said her heart had simply given out. I hadn't argued. Maybe it had been guilt that kept it beating this long, waiting for this night, waiting for forgiveness. I'd sat beside her until the dawn broke, holding her hand until it turned cold. I didn't cry. There were no tears left in me, only a strange, calm understanding. Now the house and I were alone. The scent of lavender still drifted faintly through the rooms, soft and familiar, not haunting anymore, comforting. I wandered slowly through the halls, touching the walls as though the house itself were listening. It felt alive in a new way, no longer pulsing with grief, but humming quietly with memory. In the parlor, the morning light caught the edge of the broken frame that once held Clara's photograph. I picked it up carefully, smoothing the glass shards away. The photo inside had changed again. Now it was only her, no baby, no Agnes, just Clara sitting by the window, looking outward, serene. She looked younger, freer. For a moment, I could almost feel her there beside me, watching me as she once might have when I slept in her arms. My mother. The woman whose love had turned into legend, whose grief had turned into fire, whose soul had turned into this house. "I forgive you," I whispered again. "And I hope you've forgiven me too for not remembering you sooner." A faint, warm breeze stirred the curtains. Though the air outside was still, it brushed against my cheek, gentle as a kiss, and I knew. She heard me. I spent the next few days sorting through what remained: letters, trinkets, small pieces of two women's lives bound together by love and lies. The townsfolk were curious. Of course they came by with their polite condolences and wide eyes. None of them remembered Clara, though a few old ones claimed the house had always been strange. Some even said they'd seen lights here at night when no one lived inside. I didn't argue. I just smiled and told them I was keeping it, because how could I leave it? This house was my inheritance, not of wealth, but of truth. Every brick, every floorboard carried my mother's love, Agnes's guilt, and my own rediscovered past. Selling it would be like selling my soul. So I stayed. Nights were quiet, though sometimes I'd hear faint music from the piano room, a soft, trembling note that faded before I could reach it. I stopped being afraid. Maybe she was just reminding me she was still here, watching. Or maybe it was my own memory echoing through the walls. One evening, I sat outside on the porch, the sky turning a deep violet as the sun slipped below the hills. Fireflies flickered in the garden, tiny lights moving like old spirits finally set free. I thought about Agnes, how she must have lived all those years carrying the weight of that secret, and though part of me still hurt, I couldn't hate her anymore. She had lied, yes, but she had also loved me the only way she knew how. In her silence, in her deception, there had been care twisted with fear. Sometimes love wears the face of a savior, sometimes that of a thief. When I went back inside, I noticed something odd near the fireplace. The ashes, which had been cold for days, now glowed faintly, as if catching light from nowhere. Above them, etched faintly into the soot-covered bricks, were words I hadn't seen before. Home, at last. I pressed my hand over the words, and a warmth spread through my fingers, soft and reassuring. Tears filled my eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. That night I lit the fire again. I played the lullaby on the old piano, slow, uneven, with trembling hands. The melody wove through the house, drifting up the stairs, curling around the rooms that once held screams and silence. When I reached the final note, I felt it an almost imperceptible sigh that moved through the air, gentle and final. Clara was gone, completely, peacefully. I stood there for a long while, staring into the flames, and whispered, "Good night, Mama." After that, the house never made another sound. No creaks, no whispers, no scent of smoke. Just the quiet hum of life returning. Months passed. I repaired the windows, replanted the garden, painted the old porch where the wood had splintered. The neighbors began to stop by, bringing pies and stories, curious about the old lady who lived in the Beaumont house. They didn't know the history. They didn't need to. I kept one photograph on the mantel, the final one, the one that had changed so many times before. Now it showed something new. Clara, Agnes, and me, all together. I didn't know how it appeared. Maybe it was never a photograph at all, just the house giving me closure in the only way it could. Every evening, when the sun dips low and the shadows stretch across the garden, I sit by the window with my tea, watching the wisteria sway, and sometimes, when the light hits just right, I see two women sitting beside me, one with dark hair, one with silver, and I smile. Because after a lifetime of not knowing who I was, I finally understand. I am both of them. I am the daughter of a woman who loved too fiercely, and the child of another who loved too fearfully. And somehow, between the fire and the forgiveness, they both gave me life. The house stands strong now, warm and silent. The lavender blooms year-round, its scent drifting softly through the open windows. And every time I breathe it in, I think of Clara's voice, soft, eternal singing from somewhere beyond the walls. "Hush now, little dove, you are home." I close my eyes, and I hum along, because finally, I am home.